Let go of her. The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like it had weight, like it didn't need volume to be obeyed, and the strangest part was, the man holding my wrist actually listened. His fingers loosened instantly, like something invisible had just reminded him of consequences he didn't want to face, and I stood there frozen, my breath caught somewhere between relief and confusion, because the guy who had just spoken was the same man I'd been serving black coffee to every night for the past 2 weeks, the one I'd labeled in my head as just another regular, just another quiet customer who tipped well and never caused trouble, except now the entire cafe had gone still in a way I couldn't explain, like the air itself had shifted around him, like everyone suddenly remembered something important all at once. A few days earlier, I hadn't thought twice about him. It was a slow Tuesday night, the kind where the neon sign buzzes louder than the conversations, and the smell of burnt espresso lingers too long in the air, and he walked in wearing a simple dark coat, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed money or power, just composed. I smiled at him the way I smiled at everyone. It was automatic, friendly, safe. What can I get you? I'd asked, already reaching for a cup. He looked at me for a second longer than most people do, his eyes steady, unreadable, and then he said, black coffee. That was it. No accent I could place, no small talk, just a voice that felt controlled. When I handed him the cup, I smiled again, a habit I never questioned, and that's when he said it, quiet enough that I almost thought I imagined it. Don't smile at men like that. I blinked, caught off guard, a nervous laugh slipping out before I could stop it. Excuse me. He didn't smile back, didn't apologize, just held my gaze for half a second longer, then looked away like the conversation was already over. I remember thinking he was rude, maybe a little strange, definitely not someone I needed to think about again. But he came back the next night, and the night after that, always the same seat, always the same order, and somehow, without anyone saying it out loud, everyone started treating him differently. My manager, who usually complained about everything, suddenly lowered his voice when he spoke near that corner. The other servers avoided his table unless they had to. Even the security camera above the counter seemed angled just slightly more toward where he sat, like someone had adjusted it on purpose. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was tired, that people get weird vibes sometimes, and it doesn't mean anything. But then there were the men in suits. They didn't order anything, didn't sit down. They just appeared, near the door, by the windows, outside, visible through the glass, pretending to check their phones while never really looking away. And still, he sat there, calm, untouched by the tension building around him, stirring his coffee like the world outside that small circle didn't apply to him at all. I should have realized then, should have connected the pieces. But I didn't. Not until tonight. Not until the moment that man grabbed my wrist, and everything inside me went tight with that familiar, silent panic every woman knows, and before I could even react, before I could pull away or call for help, that voice came again, steady and absolute. Let go of her. And just like that, the world shifted, and I finally understood. I hadn't been serving a regular. I'd been standing inches away from something far more dangerous, and somehow, without knowing it, I had already caught his attention. No one moved for 3 full seconds, and in a place like that, 3 seconds felt like forever. The man who had grabbed my wrist stepped back without a word, not arguing, not even looking annoyed, just careful, like he had suddenly remembered where he was and who he was standing in front of. And that was the part that unsettled me the most, because people do not just back down like that over a simple sentence unless the person speaking carries something heavier than anger, something quieter and far more final. I pulled my hand back slowly, my pulse still racing, and when I looked at him, the man from the corner table, the one I had been calling a regular in my head, he was already watching me, not with concern, not with panic, but with that same steady focus that made it feel like he was always 2 steps ahead of whatever was happening around him. Are you all right? He asked, his voice lower now, softer in a way that did not match the reaction he had just caused. I nodded too quickly. I am fine. It was automatic, the way we say it even when we are not sure if it is true, and his eyes narrowed just slightly, like he did not believe me, but was choosing not to push. The man who had let go of me muttered something under his breath and walked out without finishing his drink, and I noticed something I had never paid attention to before, the way the door opened before he even reached it, the way one of those suited men stepped aside for him, but kept his eyes on the man behind me, not the one leaving. And that was when it clicked in a way that made my stomach drop. They were not watching the room. They were watching him. I turned back toward the counter, my hands suddenly unsteady as I reached for a clean glass, trying to focus on something normal, something routine, but I could feel it, that awareness behind me, like a quiet gravity pulling everything in his direction. "You should be more careful," he said after a moment, and I stopped mid-motion, the words settling into the same space as the warning he had given me days ago. I let out a small breath. I was just doing my job. It came out sharper than I intended, a little defensive, a little embarrassed, and for a second I thought I had crossed a line I did not understand yet. But instead of reacting, he tilted his head slightly, considering me like I had just said something interesting. "Your job does not require you to invite attention," he replied, calm, controlled, like he was stating a fact instead of giving an opinion. I turned to face him fully then, my heart still beating faster than it should. Smiling is not an invitation. The words surprised even me. But once they were out, I could not take them back, and for the first time since I had met him, something shifted in his expression, not anger, not irritation, something closer to recognition. He studied me for a long second, the noise of the cafe returning slowly around us, conversations picking back up, dishes clinking, the illusion of normal settling back into place. But it felt thinner now, like I could see through it. "No," he said quietly. "But men often think it is." The way he said men made it clear he was not including himself, and that difference sent a chill down my spine I could not explain. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close he was standing, of how the space around him felt both controlled and unpredictable at the same time. "Why do you care?" I asked before I could stop myself. It was a dangerous question. I knew that the second it left my mouth. But I needed to understand why someone like him would notice something so small. He did not answer right away. His gaze shifted briefly toward the door, toward the men who had never stopped watching, then back to me. And when he spoke again, his voice dropped just enough that it felt like the words were meant only for me. "Because you do not know who is watching you when you do it." My breath caught, and for the first time, I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. He had not been warning me about himself. He had been warning me about everyone else. And somehow, that made him even more dangerous. I did not sleep well that night. Not because of what happened, but because of what did not happen. Nothing was loud. Nothing was dramatic. No raised voices. No chaos. Just a single sentence. And an entire situation ended like it had been quietly erased, and my mind kept replaying it, trying to make sense of the kind of presence that could do that without effort. The next evening, I told myself he would not come back. People like him did not belong in places like this, not for long, not without a reason, and whatever reason had brought him here, I assumed it had passed. I was wrong. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 8:12 p.m., the same time he had come in every night before, and I felt it before I saw him, that subtle shift in the room, like the air adjusted around him, making space without asking permission. I kept my eyes on the counter, pretending to be busy, but I could see his reflection in the glass display case, the dark coat, the controlled movements, the way he took the same seat without hesitation, like it already belonged to him. "Black coffee," I said before he could speak, placing the cup in front of him with a steadier hand than I expected. If he noticed, he did not say anything. "You remembered," he replied, and there was something almost approving in his tone, something that made my chest tighten in a way I did not like. "It is my job to remember," I said, keeping my voice neutral, careful, but I did not smile this time. I could feel that difference between us, small but deliberate, like I was following a rule I had not agreed to but somehow understood. He noticed. Of course he did. His eyes flickered to my face for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, then back to the cup, and for the first time, I wondered if my silence said more than my smile ever had. The cafe moved around us like normal, orders being called out, chairs scraping lightly against the floor, the low hum of conversations filling the space. But underneath it all, there was that same quiet awareness, the suited men still there, still watching, never interfering, just existing at the edges like shadows that did not belong to the room. I leaned against the counter, folding a napkin that did not need folding, trying to ignore the weight of his attention, but it lingered, steady and patient, like he was waiting for something. "What is your name?" he asked after a while, and the question caught me off guard more than anything else had. It was simple. normal. And somehow, that made it more unsettling. Emily, I said after a brief pause. I did not ask for his. I was not sure I wanted to know. He nodded once, like that was enough, like names were not something he needed to repeat. Emily, he said, testing it quietly, and hearing my name in his voice felt different, heavier, like it carried more meaning than it should have. I straightened slightly, suddenly aware of how close I was standing again. Do you always come here? I asked, immediately regretting it. It sounded like small talk, but it was not. Not really. He looked at me then, fully this time, his gaze steady, unreadable, and for a second I thought he would ignore the question entirely. For now, he answered, and that was all. 2 words that somehow managed to feel temporary and permanent at the same time. I frowned slightly. That is not really an answer. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to suggest he found something about that amusing. It is the only one you need, he said, and there it was again, that quiet control, not forcing the conversation to end, just deciding that it had. I should have walked away. I should have gone back to my other tables, focused on anything else, but instead I stayed there for a second too long, caught in the space between curiosity and caution, and that was when I noticed it. The way one of the men near the door lifted his phone slightly, not to check it, but to signal something, something small, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Adrian did not turn. He did not react, but his fingers stilled against the coffee cup, just for a moment, and that was enough for me to understand something I had been trying not to admit. He was not just being watched. He was the reason everything was being watched. And somehow, without meaning to, I had stepped into his world just by standing too close to it. I started noticing things I could not unsee. It was not one moment, not one clear sign, but a series of small details that began to stack on top of each other until ignoring them felt impossible. The way the door always opened before he reached it. The way no one ever accidentally bumped into his table. The way conversations softened when he stood up, like people were adjusting themselves without realizing why. And the way those men in suits never left, not really, just rotated positions like they were part of a system I did not understand. I tried to focus on my shift, on orders and receipts and the steady rhythm of the espresso machine, but every time I glanced toward that corner, he was there, unchanged, composed, as if the rest of the world was the one moving around him, not the other way around. Emily. My manager's voice pulled me back, sharper than usual. I turned, expecting another complaint about speed or presentation, but instead I found him standing a little straighter than normal, his eyes flicking briefly toward the corner before returning to me. Table 7 needs their check, he said, but his tone was off, too careful, like he was choosing every word. I nodded and moved, but as I passed by Adrian's table, I felt it again, that awareness, like he knew exactly where I was without needing to look. I told myself to keep walking. I did not. I slowed, just enough to set down a fresh napkin that no one had asked for. You should not hover, he said quietly, not looking up from his cup. My chest tightened. I was not hovering. It sounded weak even to me. He lifted his gaze then, meeting mine directly, and there was something different in it tonight, something more focused, less patient. You are curious, he said, not accusing, just stating it like it was already decided. I hesitated. Lying felt pointless. Would you not be? I asked. It came out softer than I intended, more honest than I planned. For a moment, he said nothing, just studied me, like he was measuring something I could not see. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair, a subtle shift that somehow made the space between us feel more intentional. Curiosity can be expensive, he said. The words settled into me in a way that made my stomach tighten, not because they sounded threatening, but because they sounded true. I folded my arms loosely, trying to ground myself. And silence is free? I asked. That almost smile appeared again, brief and controlled. Silence is safer, he corrected. I let out a small breath, glancing toward the window where one of the suited men stood just outside, pretending to be on a call while clearly watching the entrance. Safe for who? I asked before I could stop myself. This time, he did not answer immediately. His gaze followed mine for a fraction of a second, then returned, sharper now, more deliberate. For you, he said finally. Something in my chest shifted at that, a mix of disbelief and something I did not want to name. You do not even know me, I said. It was meant to create distance, to remind both of us that this was nothing, just a customer and a waitress, just a coincidence stretched too far. But instead of agreeing, instead of dismissing it, he shook his head once, slow and certain. "I know enough," he replied. The certainty in his voice made my breath catch, and before I could respond, before I could ask what that even meant, the bell above the door rang again, louder this time, sharper, like it had been pushed too hard. I turned instinctively, and the moment I saw who walked in, I felt it. That same tight pull of unease from earlier, the kind that settles in your chest before your mind can explain it. Adrian did not move. He did not need to. But the men around the room shifted, almost imperceptibly, and suddenly the cafe did not feel like a place people came to relax anymore. It felt like something else entirely, something controlled, something watched. And I realized, too late, that whatever line I had been standing near, I had just stepped over it. The door closed a little too hard behind him, the man who had just walked in, and even without turning fully, I felt the shift ripple through the room like a quiet signal being passed from one person to another. It was subtle. No one stopped talking completely. No one stared. But something changed in the rhythm of the cafe, like a song skipping half a beat, just enough for you to notice if you were paying attention. And now I was paying attention. I should not have been. That was the problem. I told myself to look away, to focus on the register, on the next order, on anything that kept me out of whatever invisible line I had crossed. But my eyes moved anyway, drawn to the reflection in the glass again, catching a glimpse of the man who had entered. He did not look out of place at first glance. Casual jacket, hands in his pockets. But there was something in the way he stood, too still, too aware, like he was not here for coffee. Like he was here for something else. Or someone else. My stomach tightened. I did not need to guess who. I felt it before I confirmed it. That pull toward the corner, and when I looked, Adrian was already watching him. Not openly. Not obviously. Just a slight angle of his head, a stillness in his posture that had not been there before. It was the first time I had seen him react to anything, and the fact that his reaction looked like nothing at all made it worse. "Emily." His voice came from behind me, closer than I expected, and I turned too quickly, my shoulder brushing the edge of the counter. He had moved without me noticing. That alone should have been impossible in a place this small. "You should take a break," he said, his tone calm, almost casual, but there was something under it now, something firmer. "I am working," I replied, even though my voice did not sound as steady as I wanted it to. He did not argue. He did not insist. He just looked at me, and somehow that was enough to make the space feel smaller. "5 minutes," he said quietly. "Outside." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to follow instructions from a man I barely knew, a man who had just proven he was not who I thought he was. But those same instincts were the ones that had tightened the second that other man walked in, the ones that were still telling me something was off in a way I could not explain. "Why?" I asked, holding his gaze, needing a reason, needing something that made sense. He did not answer right away. His eyes shifted briefly past me, toward the entrance, then back again, sharper now, more focused than I had ever seen them. "Because you are being watched," he said. The words landed quietly, but they hit harder than anything else he had said to me so far. My breath caught. "By who?" I asked, even though part of me already knew I did not want the answer. His jaw tightened just slightly, the only visible sign that the situation had changed. "Not me," he said, and for the first time, there was something almost like reassurance in his voice, something steady and certain. "And that is exactly why you should step outside." I glanced toward the door again, toward the man who had come in, and this time I saw it clearly, the way his eyes flicked in my direction just a second too long, the way his attention lingered like he was trying to decide something. A chill ran down my spine. I had not done anything. I had not said anything. But suddenly it felt like that did not matter. I looked back at Adrian, at the man who had warned me days ago about something. I had not understood, and realized with a sinking clarity that he had seen this coming before I ever noticed it. 5 minutes, he repeated, softer this time, like he was giving me a choice even though it did not feel like one. I swallowed, my pulse picking up again, and for the first time since this all started, I did not argue. I stepped away from the counter, my movements slower than usual, more deliberate, and as I reached for the door, I felt it again, that awareness, that invisible line tightening around me. And just before I pushed it open, I heard his voice one more time, low and steady behind me. Do not look back. I did not look back. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to check, to confirm that whatever tension I felt was real and not something I had imagined. But his voice stayed with me, steady and certain, like a line I was not supposed to cross again. So I pushed the door open and stepped outside into the cool night air. The difference hit me immediately. Inside had felt tight, controlled, like the walls were holding something in. Outside felt open, but not safer. Just exposed. The street was quieter than I expected for that time of night. A few cars passing, headlights sliding across the pavement in slow streaks of white and gold. The distant hum of the city continuing like nothing had changed, like my world had not just tilted slightly off balance. I wrapped my arms around myself without thinking, not from the cold, but from the way my body refused to settle, like it was still catching up to something my mind had not fully processed yet. 5 minutes, he had said. It sounded simple, measurable, but time felt different out here, stretched thin between every passing second, each one making me more aware of the fact that I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. I took a step toward the edge of the sidewalk, my eyes scanning the street without a clear reason, just searching, and that was when I noticed it. The reflection first. Not in a mirror, but in the dark window of the shop next door, a shape behind me that did not belong to the empty space I thought I had stepped into. My breath slowed. Not faster. Slower. Controlled. The way it does when something inside you decides that panic will not help. I did not turn immediately. I watched the reflection instead, the outline of a figure standing just far enough back to seem casual, just close enough to not be a coincidence. The same man. The one who had walked into the café. He had followed me. The realization settled into my chest with a quiet certainty that made everything else fall away. I had not imagined it. I had not overreacted. And Adrian had known. Of course he had known. I swallowed, my hands tightening slightly against my sleeves, and I made a decision that felt both small and important. I moved. Not running. Not fast. Just a few steps forward, enough to change the angle of the reflection, enough to confirm that he adjusted too, that the distance between us stayed the same no matter how I shifted. That was all the confirmation I needed. My heart began to pick up now, not wildly, not out of control, but steady and aware, like it was preparing for something I could not see yet. I glanced toward the corner of the street, calculating without fully realizing it, noting the light, the open space, the lack of people, and for the first time, I understood what Adrian had meant. It was not about fear. It was about awareness. About knowing when you were being watched. About recognizing it before it became something else. A car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating the sidewalk, and in that moment, I saw his face more clearly in the reflection. Not angry, not rushed, just focused, intent, like he had already decided something about me that I had not agreed to. A chill moved down my spine. I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax, forcing my movements to stay normal, even though nothing about this felt normal anymore. 5 minutes. I repeated it in my head, grounding myself in the only instruction I had been given, the only structure I had to hold on to. And then, just as I reached the edge of that invisible line between staying and leaving, I heard it. A car door closing behind me. Not loud, not sudden, just enough to shift the air again. And even before I turned, I knew. I was not alone anymore. And this time it was not him. Following me. I turned slowly this time, not out of hesitation, but because rushing felt like the wrong move, like sudden motion would only confirm something I was trying not to show. The night air felt colder now, sharper against my skin, and when I faced the source of the sound, the first thing I saw was not him. It was the car. Dark. Parked too close to the curb. Engine still running. Headlights off. The kind of presence that blends into the background unless you are looking for it. And now I was looking for everything. Then the door opened fully, and he stepped out. Not Adrian. Not the man from the cafe corner. Someone else. Taller than I expected. Clean, composed, but there was something in the way he held himself that felt intentional. Like every movement had already been decided before it happened. He closed the door behind him without taking his eyes off me, and for a second, the street felt smaller, like the distance between us meant less than it should. You left your shift early, he said, his voice calm, almost conversational, like we were discussing something normal. My pulse ticked up, but I kept my expression steady. I am on a break. He nodded once, like he accepted that, or maybe like it did not matter either way. Of course, he replied, taking a slow step forward, not enough to close the distance, just enough to make the space feel more deliberate. I resisted the urge to step back. That would be too obvious, too reactive. Instead, I held my ground, even as every instinct reminded me that I was not in control of this situation. "Do I know you?" I asked, my voice quieter than usual, but still steady. It was the safest question I could think of. Neutral, non-confrontational. He tilted his head slightly, studying me in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar. "Not yet," he said, and something about that answer made my stomach tighten. Not yet implied intention, implied time, implied that this was not an accident. I glanced briefly to the side, toward the reflection in the window again, searching for movement, for anything that told me I was not standing here alone with him, and that was when I saw it. Another figure, further back, still, watching, the same man from earlier. He had not left. He had just changed position. My breath slowed again, controlled, deliberate, and I forced myself to look back at the man in front of me. "I should get back to work," I said, testing the words, seeing how they landed. He did not block me, did not reach out, did not do anything that could be called force, but he did not move aside either. "You could," he said, his tone even, almost thoughtful. "But I think you are beginning to understand that your night is not as simple as it was an hour ago." The statement settled between us, quiet and heavy, and I realized something in that moment that shifted everything again. He was not guessing. He knew exactly how much I had already noticed, exactly how much I had already figured out. I straightened slightly, forcing myself to meet his gaze fully. "Then explain it," I said, more direct now, because pretending this was normal was no longer an option. He watched me for a long second, like he was deciding something, weighing something I could not see. Then, just as he opened his mouth to speak, the atmosphere changed again. Subtle, immediate, the kind of shift that you feel before you understand. The man's eyes flicked past me for a fraction of a second, and that was all the warning I got before another presence entered the space behind me. Close, controlled, familiar. "That will not be necessary." Adrian's voice. Low, steady, final. It moved through the air like it belonged there, like it had always been part of the scene even before he arrived, and the effect was immediate. The man in front of me stilled, not stepping back, not retreating, but adjusting in a way that told me he recognized something he could not ignore. I did not turn right away. I did not need to. I could feel it. The difference. The weight. The quiet certainty that whatever line had been forming around me, Adrian had just stepped directly into it. And somehow, everything felt both more dangerous and more controlled at the exact same time. For a moment, no one spoke. Not me. Not the man in front of me. Not even Adrian. But the silence was not empty. It was full, heavy in a way that made every small movement feel louder than it should, like the city itself had stepped back. Just enough to let whatever this was play out. I finally turned. Slowly, carefully. And there he was, closer than I expected, standing just behind me, not touching, not reaching, just there. Adrian did not look at me first. His attention stayed on the man in front of us, steady and controlled, like everything else had already been calculated before I even stepped outside. "You are out of place," Adrian said, his voice low, almost quiet, but it carried something that made the air tighten again. Not anger, not even irritation, just certainty. The man across from us did not react the way most people would. He did not step back. He did not argue. He simply held Adrian's gaze, his posture shifting slightly, not defensive, not aggressive, just aware. "I disagree," he replied calmly. "I am exactly where I intended to be." The words were smooth, practiced, like he was used to conversations that meant more than they said. I felt my pulse in my throat now, steady but impossible to ignore, and for the first time, I realized something that changed everything again. This was not random. Neither of them had ended up here by accident. I was the only one who had. Adrian took a small step forward. It was subtle, measured, but it was enough to shift the balance between them, enough to make it clear without saying it that whatever space we were standing in belonged to him. "Then your intentions need to change," Adrian said. The statement landed flat, controlled, final in a way that did not invite negotiation. The man's gaze flickered briefly, not to me, not to the street, but to the space around us, like he was taking in the unseen variables, the positions of the men I could not fully track, the quiet system that had already adjusted itself the moment Adrian stepped outside. He understood. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed just slightly, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. "You are protective of your environment," he said, choosing his words carefully. Adrian did not respond right away. His silence felt deliberate, like he was deciding how much of the truth to allow into the conversation. Then, slowly, his gaze shifted. Not to the man. To me. It was brief. Just a second. But it was enough. "I am protective of what does not belong to it," he said, his voice quieter now, but somehow more direct. The words settled into me before I could stop them, before I could decide what they meant, and my breath caught slightly, not from fear this time, but from the weight of being included in something I had never agreed to be part of. The man in front of us followed that shift, his eyes moving to me for the first time with something more focused, more deliberate. Not curiosity anymore. Recognition. That made my chest tighten again. "She does not seem to agree," he said lightly, but there was something underneath it, something testing, like he was pushing at a boundary he could not see. Adrian's expression did not change. If anything, it became more still, more controlled. "She does not need to," he replied. The simplicity of that answer should have unsettled me. It should have made me step back, create distance, reject whatever silent claim was being placed around me. But instead, I felt something else, something quieter, something I did not understand yet. Safety. The man considered that for a moment, then exhaled slowly, like he had reached the end of whatever line he had been walking. "Then I will not overstay," he said, stepping back at last, the space between us widening in a way that immediately felt noticeable. He glanced at me once more, that same measured look, like he was committing something to memory, then turned without another word and walked back toward the car. The door closed. The engine sound shifted. And just like that, he was gone. The street felt different again. Lighter. But not normal. Not anymore. I stood there for a second longer, my body still catching up to the absence of tension, and then I became aware of it again. Adrian. Still behind me. Still close. I turned slightly, just enough to meet his gaze, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw something there that had not been there before. Not control. Not calculation. Something softer. Brief. Almost gone before I could name it. 5 minutes are over," he said quietly. And somehow, it did not sound like a suggestion. I did not move right away. Even after the car disappeared into the flow of traffic, even after the tension in the air eased just enough for my shoulders to drop a fraction, something inside me stayed still, like my body had not yet decided that it was safe to return to normal. 5 minutes were over. That was what he said. Simple. Measured. Like time itself followed his rules. I exhaled slowly and turned fully toward him, closing the distance between what had just happened and what came next. "You knew," I said. It was not a question. It could not be. Too many things had lined up too precisely for it to be coincidence. His gaze held mine, steady, unreadable in the way that was starting to feel familiar. "Yes," he answered, without hesitation, without explanation, like the truth did not need anything else to support it. I frowned slightly, my thoughts catching up all at once. "Then why did you let me walk out here alone?" The words came sharper than I intended, but I did not pull them back. I needed to understand the rules of whatever this was. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, controlled. "You were not alone," he said. The answer landed differently than I expected, not defensive, not dismissive, just certain. I glanced past him instinctively, toward the edges of the street, toward the spaces I had started to notice more clearly, and for the first time, I saw it. Not one person, not obvious, but presence. Movement that blended into the background. People who looked like they belonged to the night, but were positioned just slightly too perfectly, just slightly too aware. My breath slowed. "They were watching me," I said quietly. "They were watching the situation," he corrected, his voice even, precise. The distinction mattered. I could feel that. I crossed my arms loosely, grounding myself again, trying to find something solid in a moment that still felt slightly unreal. "That is not normal," I said. It was obvious. Stating it felt almost unnecessary, but I needed to hear it out loud. He tilted his head slightly, considering me, like he was deciding how much to say. "No," he agreed. "It is not." There was no apology in it. No attempt to soften the reality of what I had just stepped into. Just acknowledgement. Honest. Unfiltered. I let out a small breath, shaking my head once as I looked back toward the cafe door, the place that had felt so ordinary just an hour ago. I was just working, I said, more to myself than to him. I did not sign up for any of this. His gaze followed mine briefly, then returned, sharper now, more focused. You did not, he said. But that does not change the fact that it found you. The words settled into me, heavy in a way that made it hard to argue, because part of me already knew they were true. I had smiled. I had stayed curious. I had not looked away soon enough. Small choices. Normal choices. But in his world, they meant something different. I looked back at him, searching his face for something I could define, something I could push against, but all I found was that same controlled calm, that same quiet authority that never needed to prove itself. So what happens now? I asked. This time, it was a real question. Not defensive, not challenging, just honest. He did not answer immediately. His eyes moved over me briefly, not assessing, not claiming, just confirming something only he understood. Then he stepped slightly closer, not enough to invade my space, just enough to make the moment feel intentional. Now, he said quietly, you stop pretending this is just a job. My breath caught slightly, not from fear, but from the shift in what that meant. The cafe door behind me felt different now. The street felt different. Even the space between us felt like it had changed shape into something I could not step out of as easily as I had stepped into it. I swallowed, my pulse steady but present, and for the first time, I did not try to deny it. And if I do not? I asked softly. It was the last piece of resistance I had left. The last question that still belonged to me. He held my gaze, unwavering, and when he answered, his voice was as calm as it had always been. Then you will learn the hard way what your smile means to the wrong man. The words echoed the first thing he had ever said to me, but now they carried weight. Context. Truth. And as I stood there, caught between the life I thought I had and the one I had just brushed against, I realized something that settled deep in my chest, quiet and undeniable. He had never been warning me about himself. He had been warning me about everyone else. And now, I finally understood why.